Thanks very much for Biolinks for having me along. I'd like to just start by acknowledging we're here in Jarrah country and thank Jarrah traditional owners for partnership with fish projects that we've been working on, and also 13 traditional owner groups where we've worked with different groups across the Murray Corridor to recover threatened fish. This presentation's a case study about southern pygmy perch, one of my favourite floodplain specialist fish. But it's also a bit of a case study about trying to scale up what we're doing locally and trying to bring that to a whole of Murray scale. So I'll start with a little bit about the southern pygmy perch. They're one of 6 threatened floodplain specialist fish in the southern Murray-Darling Basin. They only grow to about 8 centimetres and mature after 1 year, and they live for 4 or 5 years. They're real habitat specialists. They prefer aquatic vegetation and slow-flowing water, and they survive in floodplain wetlands, but also historically occurred in chain of pond type ecosystems right up the top of catchments as well. They spawn in spring, so they're spawning right about now when water temperature is above 16 degrees. They lay about 4,000 eggs, which is a low fecundity fish. And they tolerate pretty poor water quality conditions as well. So they're adapted to living in wetlands that draw down and dry, so they can handle very low dissolved oxygen. The other thing is they're very poor dispersers, so once they're lost from an area, it's difficult for them to come back. So I'll tell this a little bit like a story. Once upon a time, southern pygmy perch were common right throughout the Murray Corridor, in floodplain wetlands, in billabongs, in backwaters in the main river channels as well, and also, as I mentioned, up the top in those chain of pond type systems. Before European invasion, rivers and their floodplains were connected. In spring, water would flow out and there'd be permanent and semi-permanent wetlands right throughout the corridor in places like Barmah Forest, Gumbow Forest, right through to the lower lakes. And some genetic work was recently done at Flinders Uni showing that pygmy perch, southern pygmy perch, were actually one large connected metapopulation. So there's actually gene flow right through, from Albury down to the lower lakes. Ecologically, they have a function. They eat invertebrates and they're a really important food source for larger fish, but also for water birds. Till one day, populations started to decline. Probably from about the 1950s onwards was when they really started to decline. So the key reasons for the decline: alien fish, carp, which get in and uproot their key habitat, that being aquatic plants, predators, redfin perch and trout, and then gambusia, mosquito fish, which is such a problem for our native fish, but also our frogs as well. So they're aggressive little fish that do fin nipping, but also eat the eggs and larvae of our fish and frogs. The other key threats were the loss of permanent floodplain wetlands through the advent of irrigation and irrigation infrastructure on the floodplain, altered flow regimes, habitat destruction, particularly the loss of aquatic plants from things like grazing, sedimentation of wetlands and a drying climate. And the millennium drought for a lot of our floodplain specialist fish was almost a nail in the coffin for those threatened species. So for southern pygmy perch, the millennium drought meant that many populations were lost. So from Barmah Forest, from Gumbow Forest, some of those remaining populations in the upper catchments were lost, and some populations became inbred as well. So that led to the species being listed as threatened under the EPBC Act as vulnerable, and also across the 3 states where they occur in the Murray-Darling. And then a new partnership formed. So I work on a fish recovery plan for the Gumbow and Lower Loddon. That's all about fixing up the flows, fixing up the connectivity through putting in fishways, and fixing up habitat, both riparian and in-stream. But one of the key parts of that plan is also reintroducing 4 threatened floodplain specialist fish back into the forest where they're now locally extinct. So in 2017, we got a biodiversity on-ground grant for $40,000 and formed a really important and enduring partnership with a couple of fish interest groups, ANGFA and Native Fish Australia, and Also, the City of Greater Bendigo Council, a lot of the people that are here today from the council, look, the council's really leading the way for threatened small fish recovery across the Southern Basin, I would say. They're doing a fantastic job. Anyway, so that grant was to do some modelling to see where remnant populations might still occur, and a survey to go and find some of those remnant populations. So we found 3 remnant populations of pygmy perch, 2 in the Campaspe catchment, 1 in McIver Creek and 1 in the Jews Harp Creek kind of system, and then over in the Avoca, in the Mountain and Middle Creek system over there. There's also a population in the Upper Campaspe River proper, but that's a population that's been translocated from the Maribyrnong system at some point in time, probably come over with fishes as bait or something like that. So we then collected 100 broodstock to start a captive breeding program, and that's where the grant ended, but the partnership kept going. We decided we'd next establish some surrogate sites, 4 surrogate sites. Surrogate sites are predator-free urban wetlands or farm dams that have decent habitat that can, be a backup population, but ideally be a natural hatchery to then breed fish up and move them out to wild sites. So 2 of those sites were successful, 2 were less successful. This photo here is Cadellaway wetland just in Strathfield Say. So we released 200 fish in there that were bred up by the lady there, Chris Lamon, specialist pygmy perch breeder. Who knew there was one, but there was. She lives in Gippsland. This is what they look like after sort of 9 months after being stocked, so ready to go. And just in the last 2 weeks, we've removed and translocated 10,000 pygmy perch just from that wetland there. So it's been amazingly successful. So the general approach that the Tri-State Alliance has been taking to recover these fish: number 1, protect existing populations; 2, collect broodstock and start intensive captive breeding programs so that we can secure the species. Then to reintroduce them into surrogate sites, which can then act as natural hatcheries. Then to translocate these to managed wild sites, usually those that receive environmental water, and the habitat can be managed there as well. And ideally, for then floods to disperse them naturally and get them back to where they should be. So that table there is just the kind of characteristics that we consider at surrogate or wild sites. So the key things for pygmy perch are the habitat, particularly submerged aquatic plants. Water quality is not so much of an issue, but then really the prevailing fish assemblage. So if you've got a large number of competitors like carp gudgeons or flat-headed gudgeons, pygmy perch don't seem to take. Equally, if you've got redfin, trout, carp in the system, they won't do well. So, and then from those 4 sites, we started building and trying to scale up. Assessed many surrogate sites in the local area around Bendigo and beyond. Undertook works at those priority sites that were deemed to have some potential. So that kind of work, I guess, it's best demonstrated by the photos there. So that's in the dog park in Bendigo. So the kinds of thing that the council have done there, they cleaned it out and drained it and removed all the pest fish, planted aquatic plants, put in habitat features like rocks, like logs all the way around the edge. Those logs also prevent the dogs from running down and creating water quality issues and that kind of thing. So we've looked at urban wetlands, stormwater retention basins in new developments, and farm dams. And just to give you an indication of the cost to get a dam up to scratch, it might be sort of $3 to $5 grand, including stocking and monitoring. From this, we established 10 surrogate sites. This has spread the risk out. There are lots of successes and there are lots of failures too. And I wanted to make a point about why a failure is not actually a failure. So firstly, at each of these sites, there's often different groups involved. They become engaged, they become motivated, they raise awareness about the species. A lot of the times that we're working with traditional owners, and that's time on country, which is really important. Each project raises awareness about the species, improves the environment for other things, even if the fish don't take, like frogs and water birds, etc. There's a lot of learning by doing that goes on. We can look at those failures, work out what might have gone wrong and change for next time. And the other thing is it just means the pygmy perch are present in the landscape at a point in time. And with aquatic systems where you get floods coming through, that's a point in time that they can disperse and find another habitat where they might actually persist. And then working across the Tri-State Alliance footprint right throughout the Murray Corridor with all of the CMAs, local land services and South Australia landscapes. So we assessed and completed works at over 30 sites and engaged with many more groups. A lot of those groups are now seeking their own funding, doing their own works, doing their own awareness raising about the species. We share knowledge often about threatened floodplain specialist fish. We've got a regular wetland warriors forum that we hold, and we're learning from each other about refining those criteria, the sites that work and won't work. Restocking strategies, so we've had metapopulation models developed by Arthur Rylah Institute to work out how many fish, whether we stock adults or juveniles, where we stock them, how often, and we're sort of improving all the time with our results through that. We actually harvest sites now because these are boom and bust species, so we harvest sites to prevent the population from crashing, and that just further spreads the risk. So we've probably got over 40 sites with pygmy perch in them now. 13 surrogate sites have strong recruitment. We've got reliable breeding programs, and that means now that we've got populations to draw upon to go wild without impacting existing wild populations. So from that original 100 source fish, I should update this, it's more like 30,000 pygmy perch we've now released. So far we've collectively in Northern Victoria released at 9 different wild sites. We've had 3 successes, 3 failures and 3 unknowns, and I don't have time to go into each of these sites. I'll move on to protecting remnant populations. We've been going back and looking at the Upper Avoca sites and doing some fencing, doing some habitat rehabilitation in those, and now looking at refuges in the upstream catchments in the North Central CMA area to look for additional populations, but also future sites where we might be able to stock pygmy perch into. What makes a successful project, I think this is kind of echoed through all of the talks, it's people and it's partnerships. And I won't sort of go through the list there, but really working with TOs, with government, with community, with researchers, that's what makes a good project. Champions make a good project, buy-in from the landholder and the land manager, and engagement in media is important because that's what provides the funding, to be able to continue work on the species, and that shouldn't be understated. There are a bunch of challenges, awareness raising, permits and approvals. I'm sure these are similar across other ones. Genetics, I think we're now moving more to mixing, which is great. There seems to be a lot of conservatism around genetics, but that kind of risk of failure versus the risk of doing nothing there, we need to move forward. So have a go, mix genetics. The other big challenge is managing floodplain wetlands. A lot of them are turbid and algal driven, and we need to find ways to restore them back to being clear water macrophyte states that are productive and good for these fish species. The approach is applicable to what we're calling the Magnificent Six, so those threatened floodplain specialist fish there, but also to the likes of river blackfish and freshwater catfish, fish that can breed without needing flowing water. These can breed in farm dams. There's over 5,000 farm dams just around Bendigo, 1.3 million in Australia. We can really upscale. No reason why these species should be, threatened. Quick acknowledgement to the different breeding programs that allow us to have that fallback and allow us to be able to take fish and use them and learn from that. And then, an acknowledgement to all the different partners in the 3 states that we've been working on for southern pygmy perch. Thank you.
Thanks, Peter. We'll do a couple of questions and then we'll have a break. So who wants to kick us off? No, it was a perfect presentation.
Everyone wants a
No one,
break.
no one knows. Everyone knows what to do. Gail, yeah.
So it's not on these fish, but in the Wombat State Forest, we have what looks like a population of mountain galaxia, but we can't seem to find someone to come and check that that's what they are, so that they can be protected. So who would you suggest we contact?
I could probably come and have a look. Yeah. So you'd need a fish ecologist or a contractor, but we've got the capability at the CMA to go and have a look at different things. If it's in our CMA area,
No, because it's
the other side.
So it's south of your Central Catchment.
Yeah, I reckon. So that'd be it'd be Melbourne Water, would it? Yeah, it'd be worth getting in contact and asking. I mean, they might know if there's surveys in the area that are going on or previous records, or might be able to help you out. Yeah, that's all right.
You mentioned mosquito fish were sort of I guess fish. Is there any kind of like a student understanding of dam things? Is there sort of any sort of level that they can sort of coexist, or are they mosquito fish currently have?
Yeah, it's interesting in that if you're trying to reintroduce pygmy perch into a place that already has, and many of these fish that already has mosquito fish, it's sort of like good luck. But in that Cadellaway wetland, where it's already been saturated with southern pygmy perch before the mosquito fish moved in, and they did in the flood, it's been 2.5 years now. We still pick up reasonable numbers of gambusia, but they haven't dominated the population. So I think that's one thing. The other thing is habitat complexity, and we're finding that with some of our purple spotted gudgeon sites up north, if you've got complex habitat and the water levels aren't drawn down, because the gambos like to hang out in that top part of the water column, if you can keep them off the same level and there's complex habitat, they can coexist too. Yep.
Is it sort of, obviously, you mentioned sort of farm dams and things, is there sort of a minimum size dam that you're finding to have a viable population?
That's a good question, and probably something you need to look at. We've got some farm dams that would be, a quarter of the size of this room, where we've, had strong recruitment. So they don't need to be large. We've put them in frog ponds, which are maybe like a couple of metres by a couple of metres. They've persisted. They haven't recruited well there, but they do well in pretty small ponds. Yep.